What may appear at first glance to be a story about an aircraft engine tested in a climate chamber in Derby is in truth a matter that implicates far more than metallurgy, thrust ratios, or procurement contracts. It touches upon sovereignty, alliance structures, and the enduring constitutional allocation of responsibility for national defense. When a nation such as Canada evaluates whether to incorporate a foreign-designed propulsion system into its air fleet, the decision is not merely technical. It is constitutional in character, because it concerns how a self-governing people secures its territory, structures its defense relationships, and preserves institutional independence in a world defined by interdependence. The question beneath the headline is whether technological advantage can recalibrate not only military readiness in the Arctic, but also the balance of institutional authority that undergirds democratic defense policy. The public account is straightforward enough. Engineers at a Rolls-Royce test facility subjected a new generation turbofan engine to extreme cold, simulating conditions approximating minus 52 degrees Celsius and high-altitude Arctic operations. The engine reportedly achieved stable combat thrust in 93 seconds from a fully cold-soaked state, without auxiliary preheating systems. Comparative testing suggested that certain existing platforms required substantially longer to achieve operational readiness under similar conditions. The engine is described as destined for a Canadian-configured fighter aircraft, integrated through a modular design that permits rapid adaptation and future upgrades. The broader narrative emphasizes Arctic reliability, industrial partnership between Canada, Sweden, and the United Kingdom, and the potential creation of domestic research and manufacturing employment. These are the essential claims as presented in the source material. Yet beneath those claims lies a constitutional framework that must be understood if we are to evaluate the significance of such developments. In every constitutional democracy, the authority to provide for the national defense is distributed among institutions. Legislatures appropriate funds and establish the legal architecture for military organization. Executives negotiate procurement agreements, oversee foreign partnerships, and command the armed forces. Courts, while traditionally deferential in matters of military judgment, remain guardians of statutory and constitutional limits. Defense procurement, therefore, sits at the intersection of separation of powers and federal responsibility. It reflects not only strategic calculation, but institutional design. Historically, defense procurement has often been shaped by dominant suppliers whose industrial capacity aligns with their own national priorities. Smaller or geographically distinct nations have sometimes adapted their defense capabilities to the strategic assumptions embedded in those supply chains. The Arctic presents a revealing case study. It is not a theoretical theater of operations. It is a vast and inhospitable environment in which sovereignty is exercised through persistent presence. Aircraft that cannot launch reliably in extreme cold effectively cede time and initiative in moments when minutes determine strategic positioning. Thus, an engine capable of rapid cold ignition is not merely an engineering milestone. It becomes an instrument of sovereign expression. The constitutional question emerges when we consider how such capability is pursued and by whom. When a government opts to diversify its procurement partnerships rather than rely exclusively upon a single dominant ally, it exercises a measure of strategic autonomy. That autonomy, in turn, rests upon legislative authorization, executive negotiation, and public accountability. The choice to embed technology transfer, domestic production, and iterative upgrades within a procurement agreement signals a preference for adaptability over dependency. Whether that preference enhances constitutional resilience or introduces new forms of interdependence is a matter worthy of sober examination. In moments like these, it is tempting to view technological superiority as self-justifying. But constitutional democracies are not sustained by capability alone. They are sustained by the alignment of capability with lawful authority and institutional balance. If an Arctic propulsion breakthrough alters response timelines from 14 minutes to 93 seconds, the immediate military implications are clear. Less obvious, yet equally important, are the structural implications. Who determined that Arctic readiness required this specific innovation? Through what statutory processes was the partnership authorized? How will ongoing upgrades be supervised to ensure accountability, fiscal responsibility, and interoperability within existing alliance commitments? These are not questions of partisan preference. They are questions of constitutional stewardship. When defense innovation accelerates, the institutions responsible for oversight must not lag behind. A sovereign state strengthens itself not only by fielding capable aircraft, but by ensuring that the decisions that produce those aircraft remain anchored in transparent law, deliberative judgment, and institutional fidelity. As we consider the implications of this reported Arctic advantage, we would do well to ask whether our constitutional structures are evolving with the same discipline and foresight as the technologies they authorize. If we are to understand the deeper significance of this development, we must consider the constitutional architecture that governs military readiness in a democratic state. The power to raise and support armed forces is not a casual grant of authority. It is among the most consequential responsibilities entrusted to representative government. In Canada, as in the United States and other constitutional democracies, Parliament authorizes expenditures and establishes the statutory framework within which procurement decisions are made. The executive branch, accountable to that legislature, negotiates contracts, coordinates industrial partnerships, and determines operational requirements in light of strategic assessments. This division of authority is not incidental. It is designed to ensure that the instruments of national defense remain subject to civilian control and public accountability. The reported cold weather testing in Derby illustrates how modern defense capability increasingly depends upon transnational collaboration. A British propulsion system integrated into a Swedish-designed airframe, potentially manufactured in part within Canadian facilities, reflects a networked model of defense production. That model can enhance resilience by distributing expertise and industrial capacity across allied nations. It can also create new dependencies if not carefully structured. The constitutional responsibility of the political branches, therefore, extends beyond the immediate performance metrics of an engine. It includes safeguarding sovereign decision-making authority within the web of alliance relationships. Arctic operations in particular sharpen these considerations. Sovereignty in the North is not defended through rhetoric. It is defended through sustained presence, rapid response capability, and the logistical infrastructure necessary to operate in severe climates. If an aircraft engine can reliably ignite at minus 52 degrees Celsius without external heating, it compresses the timeline between detection of a potential incursion and airborne interception. That compression is not simply a tactical advantage. It reshapes the strategic calculus of both allies and competitors. In a region where distance and weather already impose constraints, the ability to generate thrust in 93 seconds may determine who establishes altitude, who controls engagement geometry, and who asserts effective jurisdiction over contested approaches. Yet the constitutional implications do not end with operational advantage. The text describes modular architecture permitting rapid integration and phased upgrades over a 36-month horizon. That design philosophy favors continuous evolution rather than static configuration. From a governance perspective, such adaptability requires corresponding mechanisms of oversight. Legislatures must anticipate that procurement is no longer a one-time acquisition, but an ongoing developmental partnership. Appropriations may need to account for iterative improvements. Regulatory frameworks must remain sufficiently flexible to accommodate technological refinement without sacrificing scrutiny. History offers cautionary lessons. Defense monopolies, once entrenched, can dull incentives for innovation. At the same time, fragmented procurement strategies can introduce inefficiencies and complicate interoperability within alliances. The constitutional task is to strike a balance that preserves both strategic effectiveness and institutional integrity. Diversifying suppliers may invigorate competition and stimulate research, as suggested by reports of renewed European focus on cold weather propulsion research. But diversification must not devolve into diffusion of accountability. One must also consider the human dimension described in the source material. Pilots trained in genuine Arctic conditions, engineers collaborating across national boundaries, and domestic technicians absorbing transferred expertise collectively form a reservoir of institutional knowledge. Constitutional governance depends upon such human capital. Laws and contracts establish frameworks, but it is skilled professionals who operationalize them. When a state invests in technology transfer and domestic production, it is investing not only in hardware, but in the cultivation of expertise that strengthens long-term autonomy. The potential creation of thousands of research and manufacturing positions further entwines defense procurement with democratic accountability. Economic impact becomes part of the legislative calculus. Citizens whose taxes finance these programs are entitled to understand both the strategic rationale and the industrial consequences of such decisions. Transparency in this domain reinforces public trust, particularly when the subject matter involves classified performance data and alliance coordination. The danger arises when technological breakthroughs are treated as self-executing validations of policy. No engine, however advanced, can substitute for constitutional deliberation. If Arctic propulsion capability represents a generational advance, as some internal analyses reportedly suggest, then it imposes a corresponding obligation upon elected officials to articulate clearly why this path best serves national interests. Strategic autonomy must be harmonized with alliance commitments. Industrial partnership must be aligned with fiscal responsibility. Innovation must be accompanied by lawful oversight. In constitutional democracies, the means by which we defend our territory are inseparable from the principles by which we govern ourselves. The propulsion system tested in that freezing chamber may indeed narrow response windows and expand operational certainty, but its ultimate significance will be measured not only in seconds saved during cold starts, but in whether the institutions that authorized it remain faithful to the constitutional order they are sworn to protect. When we look beyond the technical narrative, we encounter a more enduring principle: that constitutional governance requires alignment between national conditions and national capability. Geography is not an abstraction. It shapes the obligations of government. Canada's vast northern expanse, its Arctic archipelago, and the strategic waterways of the Northwest Passage impose demands that differ markedly from those of nations whose defense priorities are oriented toward temperate climates or expeditionary operations elsewhere in the world. A procurement model that merely inherits the assumptions of another state risks embedding structural misalignment into the very instruments of defense. The source material suggests that previous engine designs prioritized high-temperature cruise efficiency while accepting compromises in extreme cold performance. That trade-off may have been rational for air forces operating primarily in warmer theaters. It is less rational for a nation whose sovereignty patrols regularly traverse regions where winter temperatures render conventional systems sluggish or unreliable. The constitutional question, therefore, is whether a democratic government has adequately tailored its defense posture to the specific conditions under which it must exercise authority. To do so is not to reject alliance cooperation. It is to ensure that cooperation does not override the distinct responsibilities owed to one's own territory and citizens.